the stillness of night, some trains never stop running, not of steel and smoke, but of shadow and memory. Across forgotten tracks and mountain passes, they return, glowing in the dark, screaming with whistles no living engineer controls. A phantom engine crossing Colorado's peaks, a funeral train carrying a president into eternity, and a cursed locomotive racing endlessly through New England. These are not just stories. They are echoes of grief etched into the rails, refusing to die. Tonight you'll step into their path. Listen closely, because when the whistle sounds, it's already too late. High in the jagged heart of Colorado, where the air thins and the clouds hang heavy, lies Marshall Pass, a stretch of mountain where silence feels older than the rock itself. Once it was alive with the thunder of steam engines clawing their way across the heights, whistles echoing through the canyons, fireboxes glowing like molten hearts in the night. But the trains are gone now. The tracks are rusting, the station's rotting. And yet, when the fog drapes itself low and the wind slices through the ridges, travelers still whisper of something that refuses to fade. They say the ghost of a train still runs the pass, long after steel and smoke gave way to rust and ruin. The first whispers began more than a century ago. James Wilkins, an engineer hardened by years on the rails, swore he saw another locomotive tailing his own one moonless night. Its headlamp burned too bright, its smoke too thick and black. It stalked him for miles, never closing the gap, never falling away. When he stopped at the next station, his hands shaking, there was nothing on the line, no other train, no schedule, no trace. His crew laughed nervously, but Wilkins didn't. He carried the sight with him, a weight that grew heavier with each mile. Weeks later, his engine derailed in a storm, plunging down the mountainside. His body was never recovered. Locals said the phantom train had taken him, claimed him as one of its own. Stories echoed in the years that followed. Ranchers living near the track spoke of being jolted awake by a shrill whistle tearing through the canyons. They would rush outside, expecting to see the glow of a headlamp cresting the ridges. Instead, they were met with silence and an empty night sky. Some swore they heard wheels grinding on rails that no longer gleamed, steam hissing as if from an invisible boiler. And even the faint murmur of voices passengers carried on a current of mountain wind. It was as if the land itself had remembered a train that should have never been. By the mid-20th century, hunters and wanderers began adding their own encounters to the growing legend. In the 1950s, a man named Carl camped with friends near the abandoned rail line. He was jolted awake by the ground trembling beneath him, a vibration too powerful to mistake. Convinced an engine was barreling down on their camp, he stumbled outside, heart hammering, but the night was dark and still. Then came the roar, sparks crackling in the distance, a furnace glow swelling in the black. Carl froze as a colossal silhouette stormed straight toward him, smoke billowing like storm clouds. He dove aside, bracing for impact, but the noise screamed past him, the glow vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared. When dawn broke, his friends laughed until they found scorched earth etched into the ground, where no train had run in decades. Skeptics tried to explain it away. They said it was the wind, or mountain echoes, or tired eyes seeing shapes in the fog. But not everyone agreed. A retired railroad worker named Harold believed the ghost train was more than rumor. He tied it to a disaster buried in history, 1886, when an overloaded engine lost its grip on the descent and careened into a ravine. Dozens died, their bodies hurried into shallow mountain graves, the wreckage sealed away beneath landslides. They never finished their journey, Harold rasped in a taped interview before his death. So the train still runs, searching for the station it never reached. Hikers who test themselves against the pass speak of sudden cold that cuts through their bones, as if the mountain itself exhales frost. Some claim to hear the whistle, faint and distant, carried on the wind, even when no one else reacts. Others describe the pungent reek of coal smoke wafting through the snow. A couple once told of standing on the abandoned tracks and seeing impossibly a rail car ahead of them, windows glowing, silhouettes of passengers pressed against the glass. They blinked, and it was gone, leaving only empty rails swallowed by weeds. And there are the stories people don't like to share. A woman in Gunnison whispered that her brother never returned from a hunting trip. His rifle and pack were found beside the rails, but his body vanished as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Some believed he'd stepped in front of the phantom train, unable to tell the difference between vision and reality. Others muttered that the souls trapped inside the locomotive were content to ride forever alone, that they were waiting for company. The legend grew, piece by piece, like steel rails laid across generations. Paranormal investigators dragged recorders and cameras into the pass, desperate for proof. Some claimed success whistles etched into static, sudden bursts of light, shadows darting in the fog. Skeptics rolled their eyes, but those who have seen it never laughed. They said the sound wasn't in your ears at all. It was in your bones and the marrow, vibrating like the mountain itself was remembering the dead. By the time night settles heavy on Marshall Pass, the atmosphere feels charged, waiting. Stars dim behind storm clouds, and the wind whips across the ridges like an approaching storm. Some insist they've seen a lantern bobbing far down the tracks, swaying closer with each heartbeat. If you wait too long, they warn, that lantern blossoms into a blinding headlamp. And then, before you can move, the phantom engine bursts from the fog, roaring, screaming, the heat of its furnace searing your skin. But blink once, and it's gone. Only the echo remains, fading into silence, as though daring you to wait for its return. Scientists offer easy answers: temperature inversions, mountain acoustics, the tricks of a restless mind. But locals are less generous with their explanations. To them, the phantom train isn't theory, it's fact. A living echo, a curse bound to steel. And those unlucky enough to witness it often wish they hadn't. One fall evening, a backpacker named Daniel recorded his hike along the abandoned tracks. His camera footage showed nothing unusual at first. The jagged ridges, the skeletal trees rattling in the wind, his breath fogging in the cold. Hours later, the footage took a turn. Static flooded the sound, swallowing his voice. In the frame, far behind him, a white light flared. The camera jolted as Daniel turned, the lens capturing only a smear of brilliance rushing closer. His last words, hoarse and frantic, bled through the static. "It's coming." The recording ended abruptly. Search parties found his gear abandoned near the tracks. His body was never recovered. The mountains grew hungrier with each passing year. Witnesses claimed the phantom wasn't content to appear anymore, it interacted. One group of hikers described how the temperature plummeted around them, frost crawling across their tent fabric, as if fingers of ice dragged themselves across the cloth. Then came the whistle, so loud it rattled their bones. One man staggered outside, insisting he could see the glow of the furnace barreling toward them. He collapsed before the tracks, trembling, eyes glazed. When the others rushed to drag him away, he whispered only one phrase over and over: "Passengers. They're waiting for us." Paranormal teams returned to the pass, armed with infrared cameras, EVP recorders, even drones. One group from Denver claimed they captured footage of spectral figures, clustered along the tracks, faded silhouettes in coats and dresses, faces turned toward the horizon, waiting for something. When the footage was replayed later, the figures were gone. Only the sound remained, a deep metallic groan like steel straining against steel. The investigators never returned to the pass. As the legend darkened, locals shared stories behind closed doors. They spoke of passengers glimpsed through fog, faces pressed against invisible glass. They swore that if you met their eyes too long, you felt yourself pulled toward the tracks, your body moving without thought, as if the train itself wanted you aboard. Some said the mountain wasn't haunted at all, it was hungry, feeding on those who believed too strongly. And yet, people kept going. Curiosity outweighed fear. One winter, a storm swallowed the pass whole. And yet residents in Gunnison swore they heard the whistle screaming through the blizzard, louder than thunder, echoing for hours. No one dared venture close. But in the morning, the snow on the tracks was melted, as if something burning hot had cut straight through the storm. The stories reach a crescendo at the darkest hours, when the pass feels alive and hostile. Travelers tell of standing on the broken rails, feeling the tremor before hearing the sound. First a hum, then a roar, then the shriek of steel biting steel. By the time the headlamp bursts into view, it's too late to run. Some collapse, blinded, consumed by the furnace glow. Others swear they feel the pull of a rushing wind as the engine barrels through them. leaving them standing frozen and hollow, as though something vital has been torn away. The legend ends where it began with the passengers. A woman once confessed, shaking, that she'd seen them. Not shadows, not flickers, but clear as the living. Dozens of faces behind glass, pale and sorrowful, lips moving in silence. She felt them watching her, beckoning, and in that moment she understood they weren't trapped. They were searching for replacements. And so the tale lingers, stitched into the bones of Colorado's mountains. Marshall Pass is no longer a place of commerce or travel. It is a graveyard of iron and fire, a monument to journeys unfinished. The phantom train still runs, they say, and it always will. Some hear it, some see it, some vanish because of it. And those who do return carry the same haunted look, whispering the same words, that the train is still out there. It's always closer than you think. And if you linger too long on the broken tracks, when the wind dies and the night holds its breath, you may hear the whistle, not in the air, but in your bones. The mountain does not forget. Neither does the train. The spring of 1865 was unlike any other. The nation staggered beneath a grief so heavy it felt carved into the air itself. President Abraham Lincoln, struck down by an assassin's bullet, was placed aboard a funeral train that would bear him home from Washington, D.C., through towns and fields and silent crowds, all the way to Springfield, Illinois. For nearly 2 weeks, the train moved like a shadow across the country, a procession of sorrow draped in black. People lined the tracks for miles, hats clutched to their chests, tears streaking their faces as the coffin passed. The living said farewell, but the dead may not have let go so easily. For more than a century, whispers have claimed the funeral train never truly ended its journey. They say it still runs, long after the tracks have vanished, long after iron and wood rotted back into the soil. A phantom procession replaying itself across the night each April, beneath a sky that seems to mourn with it. The first stories began not long after the real train's final stop. Railroad workers in the Midwest spoke of hearing a whistle, and they had known a note that pierced the night like a blade. Drawn out and sorrowful, the sound of mourning given form. Men felt the rails tremble beneath their boots, even though no scheduled engine was due. They would look into the dark and see it, a faint glow on the horizon, bluish and cold. Unlike the golden warmth of a living locomotive's lamp, this light was pale as frost. As it drew closer, their breath faltered. Carriages emerged, draped in black bunting that fluttered without wind. Through the windows sat pale figures, unmoving eyes fixed outward into the void. And in the very center, resting on a platform inside a glass car, lay the coffin itself draped in the American flag. Those who saw it swore time itself faltered. Watches froze mid-tick. Pendulums hung motionless in the air. The breeze stilled. Insects ceased their song. Even the moon seemed to dim. A telegraph operator described the wires humming as if alive, vibrating with the sorrow of the passing train. Then, as the last car dissolved into the mist, the spell broke. The night rushed back. Crickets chirped, clocks ticked, and men blinked as though awakening from a dream. In Albany, New York, the story became legend. Every April, railroad workers swore to see the spectral engine crawl from the fog, its smokestack vomiting a plume that melted into the night like shadow-made liquid. They described soldiers in spectral blue uniforms riding stiff at attention, rifles gripped in spectral hands. Behind them came a bandit's muffled dirge echoing from nowhere, drums like heartbeats from another world. The sound, they said, filled their chests with a grief, so crushing it nearly brought them to their knees.
Ow.
Even the living trains seemed to bow in reverence. Conductors reported their engines slowing without command, wheels locking as if seized by invisible hands. Sparks spat from the rails as locomotives fought to resist, only to yield. No train, it seemed, dared move until the ghostly funeral procession had passed. And the sightings were not confined to New York. In Illinois, near Springfield, farmers told of hearing the whistle in the dead of night, long after the last line was abandoned. They spoke of fields trembling beneath phantom wheels, though the tracks had been torn up for years. Teacher recalled waking to the sight of carriages glowing faintly outside her window, rolling across the horizon without sound. She later learned her home stood beside the very path the original train once took. Skeptics scoffed. They said it was grief given shape, a nation haunted by memory rather than spirits. But the consistency nodded doubt. Witnesses separated by miles, decades, circumstance described the same details. Black-draped carriages, a coffin under glass, the unnatural silence that smothered the earth as it passed. And then there was the Rochester account, whispered more than told. A young man walking home heard the whistle and thought nothing of it, just a late train. But the rails beneath his feet began to glow, pale blue like moonlight. The engine burst from the dark, great wheels spinning soundlessly, carriages filled with shadows of passengers who did not belong to this world. He fell to his knees as the funeral car glided by, his pulse hammering in his ears. Through the glass the coffin loomed, and beside it stood a tall, spectral figure in black. The face was unmistakable. Abraham Lincoln himself, eyes closed, expression grave. The young man swore that just before the train dissolved into mist, the figure's eyes opened. For a single, terrible instant, the 16th President of the United States stared directly at him. For some, Lincoln's phantom train is not a horror story, but a lament, a monument of grief replayed through eternity. And yet, the details are too chilling to rest easy. Again and again, witnesses speak of the same impossible signs. Clocks freezing, animals falling silent, the living machinery of the rails yielding to something it cannot fight. If this is grief given shape, it is grief with power. Railroad men told of walking beside the tracks only to feel a sudden plunge in temperature, their lantern flames guttering out. A whistle would drift through the air, and when they raised their eyes, the horizon was no longer empty. A great black engine rolled forward, wrapped in shadow. Soldiers stared blankly from the cars, rifles glinting with pale light. A dirge rattled faintly, muffled as though carried on a wind that blew only for the dead. By the time the coffin appeared, they said, tears streamed unbidden from their eyes, their bodies overcome by a sorrow not their own. Some encounters hinted at something darker. Telegraph operators whispered that when the phantom train passed, their instruments sprang to life without touch. Keys clicked wildly, spelling nonsense or messages no one had sent. One report claimed the wires tapped out a phrase again and again, "He is not at rest." In Illinois, a farmer once returned to his fields in April to find deep grooves cut through the soil, as though great wheels had passed in the night. There were no tracks left for miles, yet the furrows stretched across the earth in a perfect line. And then there are the stories of those who didn't survive their encounter. A man in Pennsylvania went missing after claiming he would wait by the old line until the ghost train passed. His body was never recovered, but neighbors swore they heard the whistle that night. Long and mournful, carrying farther than sound should. Paranormal investigators have tried to capture proof for decades. Some bring clocks, hoping to watch the hands freeze. Others wait with cameras, only to return with reels of fog and silence. Yet a few claim success. A faint outline of a black carriage drifting across the horizon. A muffled drumbeat etched into their recordings. One man returned with a photograph of empty rails. And in the background, the faint glint of a flag-draped coffin. The stories reached their peak in Rochester, where the young man's testimony still circulates. He described Lincoln's face as peaceful until those eyes opened. The gaze, he said, was not cruel, was not even sorrowful, was something else entirely, something vast and unreadable, as though the dead president was searching, watching, measuring. Those who hear the tales shiver not at the ghost itself, but at the implication. If Lincoln's phantom is aware, if the train is not merely a replay but a living shadow of history, then perhaps it is not bound to its rails at all. Perhaps it chooses where to appear. Perhaps it seeks out witnesses. And what happens if you meet its gaze too long? The question lingers each April when the anniversary draws near. Along abandoned railbeds, in forgotten fields, and through the quiet countryside, people still claim to hear the whistle. Some wait, daring to see it. Most flee before midnight. But every so often, someone does not return. The Lincoln funeral train remains one of America's most enduring ghost legends, and perhaps its most mournful. A relic of grief, or a spirit trapped forever between worlds, replaying its journey to Springfield. But those who have stood on the path and felt the rails hum beneath their feet insist on one thing: it is more than legend. Because when the night is still, When the April winds cut sharp, and when the world seems to hold its breath, the whistle does not echo from memory. It comes from the dark. And if you are unlucky enough to be standing there when the headlamp flares, you may find the great procession slowing just for you. A new witness, a new mourner, perhaps even a new passenger. The coffin waits, after all. They used to call it the White Train. In the late 1800s, when the New York and New England Railroad was at its peak, this gleaming locomotive cut a silver path between Boston and New York by day. It looked like progress itself, painted a blinding white, polished until the cars reflected sunlight like mirrors. But by night, when the tracks fell silent and the countryside folded into darkness, the legend began. People whispered that the White Train never left the rails at all. Even after its retirement, a ghostly twin was said to still haunt the line. Racing through the Connecticut hills and Massachusetts woods, a phantom forever searching for a station it would never reach. One of the first stories came from a telegraph operator in Thomaston. He worked the midnight shift in a lonely depot, surrounded by ticking clocks and humming wires. On a spring night when no trains were scheduled, the wires suddenly trembled, buzzing like insects trapped inside the copper. He checked the timetable, then the clock. Nearly midnight, nothing should have been moving. And then he heard it, the pounding rhythm of steel wheels striking iron. At first, he assumed a late freight had been delayed, but the sound grew strange, hollow, echoing too fast. He leaned out his window just as the night filled with a blinding glow. The White Train thundered past, its brilliance so sharp it seared his vision. Through the windows of its cars, he swore he saw passengers' rows of pale, stiff faces staring forward, their eyes wide and glassy. And then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The wires went still. The tracks were silent. He would spend the rest of his life insisting that what he saw was real. More accounts followed. Farmers described a glowing engine cutting across their fields, its whistle mournful and hollow, like sound carried from a distant world. They would wake to find no tracks disturbed, no smoke in the air, yet the night carried the scent of coal. And sometimes their livestock would panic without reason. Children dared each other to linger by the rails after dark, claiming a sudden chill would sweep through, as if some invisible force rushed past, dragging shadows in its wake. Some blamed tragedy. In the 1890s, a passenger train derailed near Danbury, killing several. Survivors remembered the screams, the tipping cars, the shriek of twisting steel. Locals whispered, the disaster cursed the White Train, condemning it to replay its journey endlessly, a phantom driven by sorrow. Skeptics called the tales superstition, yet even men of the railroad admitted unease. Too many strange things happened on that line to be coincidence. In 1910, conductor Patrick O'Rourke saw it himself. His train was crawling through the countryside when a blinding light appeared ahead. Convinced another locomotive was barreling toward them, he yanked the brakes. Cars screeched. Sparks lit the night. Passengers screamed as they lurched to a halt. Then silence. The light grew closer, swelling until it filled the entire line only. This was no ordinary train. It drifted past them with ghostly speed, glowing so intensely O'Rourke shielded his eyes. And in its cars he glimpsed faces staring back, motionless, unblinking, as though made of wax. The vision vanished in seconds. His train sat still on empty tracks. And O'Rourke, shaken to his core, would never speak of it without trembling. Decades later, hikers, farmers, and wanderers still told the same tale. In the 1960s, one man recounted how the air turned heavy and cold as he followed an abandoned section of track. He looked up to see a faint white shimmer, swelling quickly into the unmistakable outline of a train. Its cars roared by, translucent, filled with silhouettes that shifted like shadows trapped in glass. He stood frozen, certain he felt the ground shudder beneath his boots. Then it was gone. His watch had stopped at the precise moment the phantom appeared. The sightings piled up, always the same. The smell of coal, the rush of wind, the glow of something that should not exist. Paranormal investigators labeled it a residual haunting, an echo of history playing endlessly. Etched into the land by tragedy, but others claimed it was a warning. In the 1920s, a group of workers spotted the phantom train near a bridge. Days later, the bridge collapsed. They swore the white train had come to foretell disaster. Yet darker theories took hold. A Massachusetts folklorist suggested the passengers weren't spirits at all, but souls imprisoned, bound to ride forever in a limbo they could never escape. He warned that anyone who gazed too long into the phantom windows risked being taken aboard, and soon, a chilling story seemed to prove him right. In 1935, a boy chased a glow along the tracks one night. His friends said they saw him freeze in place, staring straight into the phantom's blinding light as it swept past. When the train vanished, so did he. Search parties scoured the countryside for weeks, but the boy was never found. His name lingers only in whispers, a warning tied forever to the legend of the white train. By the mid-20th century, the white train was no longer just a story told around fireplaces. It had become a ritual for thrill-seekers. College students dared each other to camp by abandoned stations, waiting through the night, in hopes of hearing the phantom whistle. Railroad enthusiasts tracked reports, mapping sightings along the old New York and New England line. But most who went searching returned empty-handed. The rails lay rusting, the air still. And yet every so often one of them came back with eyes wide, voice shaking, swearing they had seen something that could not be explained. Some described it as faint a shimmer of moonlight that seemed to move against the wind, taking form only when it was nearly upon them. Others said it appeared in full fury, wheels screaming, whistle wailing, light so bright it turned night to day. Always it came without warning, always it left without trace. In 1972, a group of paranormal researchers set up cameras along a stretch near Waterbury. At 2:14 in the morning, they reported a blast of cold air sweeping the valley, followed by a sound like rushing steam. Their instruments flickered, batteries drained. And then, in the distance, their microphones caught at the distinct clatter of wheels on iron. The researchers swore they saw a pale light curve around the bend. But when they developed the film, nothing appeared. All that remained was static. For locals, the white train became less a ghost story and more an omen. Farmers said crops failed after a sighting. A woman claimed she awoke one night to find the phantom train passing outside her window, though the rails had been gone for years. The glow filled her house like daylight, and she swore she saw faces pressing against the glass of its cars, watching her. For weeks afterward, she felt eyes on her whenever she walked alone. Skeptics insisted there was always an explanation: stray headlights, tricks of the mist, overactive imaginations. But no one could explain the disappearances. That boy in 1935 wasn't the only one. In the decades since, there have been scattered tales: a hunter vanishing near the rails, a drifter never seen again after following the glow. Each story ended the same: someone staring too long, stepping too close, and then gone. By the turn of the century, the tracks of the white train had been almost entirely absorbed into other rail systems. But the legend refused to die. Even now, travelers whisper that on damp spring nights, or on anniversaries of old disasters, the phantom train returns. Some claim to have heard it in the fog, a distant whistle echoing against the hills, followed by the rush of unseen wheels. A handful insist they saw its glow through the trees, flickering like lightning that never touched the ground. One recent account comes from a man walking his dog along the old line near Danbury. He said the night was silent until a sudden cold wind pressed against him. His dog froze, growling, then whimpered and tried to flee. Through the mist, a white brilliance appeared, swelling into the form of a train barreling straight toward him. Leapt from the path as it roared past, his skin prickling from the icy air it carried. When he looked back, there was nothing but empty rails. His watch, too, had stopped at the moment of the encounter. He has never walked that path again. And so the question lingers: is the white train a memory replaying itself, or something far darker? Some say it is an echo of grief. Others swear it is a predator, a vessel that collects souls as it rushes endlessly through the night. Perhaps it is both a wound in time and a hunter that feeds on those who dare to look too closely. The truth may never be known, but the legend remains. Travelers who walk the abandoned rails after midnight tell of hearing a whistle when the moon hides behind the clouds and the mist curls low to the ground. They feel the chill before they see the glow. And those who are wise turn away, refusing to watch as the phantom passes. But not everyone looks away. Some can't resist staring into the windows, into those endless rows of pale, watching faces. And if you do, you might feel the ground tremble, the air grow cold, and your breath catch as the light blinds you. And when it fades, when silence returns, someone may be missing. Perhaps you. Perhaps the friend who stood beside you. Because once you've looked into the white train, there's no guarantee you won't be invited aboard. And if you are, you'll ride forever. A pale face in a phantom car, rushing endlessly toward a station that does not exist.